Good Tuesday morning. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell with America's Talking Network. Get the headlines at thecentersquare.com and this podcast anywhere you get podcasts. Just search Illinois in Focus. Several things to tackle today. We'll talk about the latest in the corruption trial against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. There were some opening statements yesterday that continues today after they finally picked a jury and all the alternates needed in that case. We'll also hear what's changing on the immigration housing front out of Chicago, but some barbs back and forth between Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson and President Donald Trump. So we'll get to that as well. But up next, we got to tackle the latest in the filings against Illinois' gun and magazine ban, with that 30-day window coming to a close and the state and plaintiffs filing their final conclusions. We'll get reaction to those from Todd Vandermeide in just moments. So stay tuned. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us each and every weekday morning here with America's Talking Network. It's now in the hands of a federal judge to the fate of Illinois' gun and magazine ban. Welcome in. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell with America's Talking Network, and get the headlines at thecentersquare.com. And if you go to the Center Square, you'll be able to access some of these briefs, but you can also follow me on X. Just search Bishop on Air, and you should be able to find where you can download these briefs yourself. But let's get right on into it. Of course, the Protect Illinois Communities Act was enacted in January of 2023. Federal lawsuits filed shortly thereafter. Last year, if you recall, in the district courts, when these cases were consolidated, Judge Stephen McGlynn issued a preliminary injunction, essentially an initial move to block the law from being in effect for 6 days before the state appealed to the Seventh Circuit Appeals Court, and the Seventh Circuit put a stay, essentially holding McGlynn's order from being effective until they dealt with the issue on preliminary grounds, right? So this was all just preliminary grounds, not on final judgment. Well, last year, the plaintiffs then appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which then later on, earlier this year, replied back and said this was on preliminary grounds. We'll take a gun ban challenge if it's on final judgment, but not until then. So ultimately, all of those cases went right back to the district court. Last month, in McGlynn's district court in East St. Louis, he held a 4-day bench trial, hearing from experts from both sides of this. They tackled the issues that the Seventh Circuit really addressed, which they said the state had a likelihood of succeeding on the merits because these banned firearms, like an AR-15, are too similar to military-grade firearms. So during the bench trial, a lot of conversation about that particular issue. But then at the end of the trial, after McGlynn reflected on the race riots of 1917 in East St. Louis, talking about how things may have been different if the black victims in that case had firearms to protect themselves that were being debated during the bench trial. So it was an interesting kind of revelation of sorts of how McGlynn could rule in that case. But now, here we are, the 30-day window expiring for when McGlynn gave the litigants the deadline to file their final briefs. And what we have are proposed conclusions of law and proposed orders from both sides. And we'll bring up Todd Vandermeide here in a moment, but I did want to just quick overview of what we're looking at here. And if you follow me on X, you can see where we posted the links and the various arguments that are being made here. So the state filed 3,500 pages of exhibits and the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law. Just some bullet points here. Among those proposed findings, they say firearms, accessories, and ammunition banned by the law restricts those arms are useful in military service and unusually dangerous, they say. The AR-15 platform rifles, the act restricts, are functionally identical to the M16 and M4 rifles. They go on to say the AK-47 is functionally identical to the AK-47 rifles used by militaries around the world. They continue on talking about 50 caliber rifles. They talk about many of the pistols the act restricts are either AR or AK platform firearms or semi-automatic versions of submachine guns. The shotguns the act restricts are a narrow subcategory of large capacity semi-automatic shotguns. Firearms and large capacity ammunition devices the act restricts are not commonly used for lawful self-defense, the state argues. And then they go further to unpack all of that. You can look at it yourself and find those bullet points. Again, go to x.com/bishoponair for those posts. But they also argue in their final pleading here that if the state issues an injunction, or if the federal judge issues an injunction, they say it should be limited in scope and should be stayed pending appeal. Plaintiffs are not entitled to a permanent injunction because they've not prevailed on their claims, the state argues. If this court disagrees, however, any injunction it enters must be limited in scope and should be stayed pending review by the appellate courts. So clearly, the state's trying to hedge any potential ruling from McGlynn, asking that he put a stay on his ruling if it indeed is a final judgment order striking down the law. But then we had the plaintiffs file their briefs, and in a general plaintiffs' proposed findings of fact, they spell out in some detail, and we'll just look at the table of contents here. The findings of fact, of course, Protect Illinois Communities Act. They say that the plaintiffs do have standing to challenge it. They talk about the various devices, Pica bands, that are owned by ordinary people and do not, and they do keep those to use for lawful purposes like self-defense. But then you get to the proposed conclusions of law, and they say the firearms and feeding devices that Pica outlaws are arms, and they argue no historical tradition justifies the Protect Illinois Communities Act. So that's just one plaintiff's filing. Then you get to the Langley plaintiff's filing, and there you've got some interesting things that attorney Thomas Magg argues here, and he even brings up the issue that McGlynn raised at the tail end of the trial. He says that the court, at the close of the live portion of the evidence, recounted with accuracy the history of the St. Louis riots from over 100 years ago. This recounting hits the undersigned with a high degree of personal interest, having been familiar with the story. The court asked, perhaps rhetorically, perhaps not, how things might have been different if the victims of that riot had possessed a few of the arms at issue in the case. Said another way, what would have happened if a few of the potential victims, not even all of them, had been reasonably well armed? So an interesting argument there with the Langley plaintiffs reminding the judge of what he had to say. But then we get into the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois filing here, and they argue that the registration is a violation. They argue that the restriction on parts are a violation. And here you'll see one particular line relevant for our next guest. It talks about how, by banning firearms, it precludes Illinoisans like Mr. Vandermeide from being able to keep their firearms in working order or suited to their needs so that they can maintain proficiency in their use. And it cites the Rhonda Ezell case on that front. So let's go ahead and bring up Todd Vandermeide. He joins us now to kind of give his reaction of what happens next in this case. Todd, thanks for taking time with us this morning. Of course, the briefs from the plaintiffs filed late last night. I only saw them early this morning when I got up at 5. But, where are we at in this case, and where do we go from here?
It is all up to the judge. So just like when you listen to Supreme Court arguments, and the orals are done, and Justice Roberts says the case is submitted, that's where we are. The case is submitted to the judge. He has everything that anybody is going to throw at it. And it's now in his hands. And we'll see what he rules. I mean, we think we're going to get a positive ruling based on things that he has said in the courtroom and based on the way he ruled on the injunction. But the judge has a difficult task because the Seventh Circuit has come up with these two made up tests that they just conjured out of whole cloth. They have the test of are they arms because they have some military connection, look, whatever, and that they must have been used in self defense, which is found nowhere in Heller, nowhere in McDonald, nowhere in Bruin. And this is the same thing that the Fourth Circuit did in the former Bianchi, now Snope case. They keep making up this militaristic test, which based on what if this had been litigated in 1791, then the muskets the militia members brought to muster would have been illegal. They would have been able to own those. There's always, and the funny thing is, they ban guns like the AR-15 that have never been used in a formal, army setting, but yet the 1911 is perfectly fine to own, and that was adopted by the military. So they're schizophrenic on this. But that we're in front of the judge. We'll see how long it takes the judge to rule. If memory serves me correctly, on the preliminary injunction, he did something in about 3 weeks. And all the timing on this is going to get very interesting because it's the 22nd today. The judge has the case. And now we know that on the 12th of November, what is that? 3 week, less than a month, 3 weeks or so. Viramontes is going to be argued in front of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. So what's going to come out of that? What are those orals going to look like? One, does the same panel that had our case, Beavis, and this whole menagerie of challenges, do they just think that Viramontes is a just different side of the same coin? And do they take it as a comeback case? Is it a fresh panel? If it's a fresh panel, who's on the panel? Does Easterbrook elbow his way in there to have another, round of influence on his preposterous standards?
Todd, obviously, a lot's going to happen after any kind of ruling comes, but you're predicting we could see something within 3 weeks.
Well, that's how, you think you were there for the preliminary injunction stuff. You saw how in depth it got, and it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, my hopes are that Judge McGlynn sits there and writes a very favorable opinion in our case and towards our side. And we get a very broad ruling on that. And he just happens to have a sense of humor, and he sits there and releases the case at 4 o'clock on Wednesday before Thanksgiving in front of a holiday weekend and gives us a freedom weekend to include Black Friday. And, the state is left scrambling through a holiday weekend to try and get, in front of an emergency order in front of the Court of Appeals. And it gives us the ability to have a freedom week where some of those firearms that have been locked up since the last injunction because they couldn't be transferred get transferred, and we go from there. We could, it's any, I have a whole bunch of theories and thoughts about what happens with Viramontes. Does the appellate court try to rush an order out in order to block or subvert anything Judge McGlynn would plan on writing? Because Viramontes was a merits decision that was hostile to us. So we've got that. And Viramontes will be argued before Bianchi, now Snope, goes to conference. And we won't see, what the outcome of the Supreme Court is going to be probably before the first week of December or possibly a little later. And what happens then? So if the Supreme Court takes cert and we don't have a decision in McGlynn, does McGlynn hold? If the Supreme Court takes cert in Snope, does the Seventh Circuit pause their decision in Viramontes? Um, I'm sure that if we get a decision out of McGlynn and it goes forward, and the state appeals a bad decision, then I'm sure that if the Supreme Court grabs cert and Snope, then our side will more than likely ask the Seventh Circuit for a stay, saying there's no reason to argue this until we see what the Supreme Court's going to do. So those are all the moving pieces that could affect our case in Southern Illinois.
Todd, your thoughts on the state asking for a stay if McGlynn issues a final judgment injunction? Is this just the kind of their last-ditch effort, or how do you perceive this?
Our arguments are so bad. Please give us a chance to get to the Court of Appeals. That's what it says. I mean, they're reading the room the same way I'm reading the room, I guess. I mean, I'm sitting here and I've been saying I think we're going to get a positive opinion out of Judge McGlynn that's I think it's going to be like Benita's, well-reasoned, well thought out, detailed, annotated. And I think they kind of, you heard what he said in that closing statement. I think they read the tea leaves and they know they're going to lose. And that's why I think this, 3,500 pages was one possibly a way to slow it down. Because if, let's say that McGlynn sat there and issued a decision in a week. Oh, he had it written. It was pre-done. He didn't give us the benefit of our briefs, or there's no way you could have gone through 3,500 pages, whatever.
Yeah, of exhibits. I mean, but McGlynn even said he didn't want to be papered to death at one point.
You were there. You heard it right alongside me. And what does the state do? Just the opposite. So, I mean, growing up when your mom said, don't do that, did you go ahead and do it anyway just because you wanted to test the boundaries, or what?
Yeah.
I mean,
well Todd, finally here, I mean, obviously, you've got this Illinois case at the district level, final judgment expected soon. It's going to go to the appeals court. But, as far as the Snope case in the Supreme Court, clarify for us, if you could. Does that deal with magazines? If it doesn't deal with magazines, what does that mean for, Illinois' law?
I don't think... as I've read it, I didn't see much of a reference to magazines at all. I think Snope might be a clean gun ban case only. I'll have to go back and reread it. But we've got so many of these things floating around, they kind of get lost and jumble. But, you have Duncan that's ahead of us on magazines right now, but the Ninth Circuit is playing their typical games with the magazine ban in California. There was a magazine ban out of Jersey, and I don't know what the status on that one is, but the stuff is all starting to bubble to the surface. So we could go on magazines, but, they could make a passing comment on magazines and Snope and just say, hey, because remember what we're talking about. We are talking about semi-automatic firearms, and the ones they really hate are semi-automatic firearms with detachable magazines. So I think the court, in delineating what weapons are protected, is going to have to touch on magazines one way or the other. Now, could they parse it and say semi-autos that take detachable magazines are protected, and then turn around and just leave it at that and do something, and come back for another day? Very likely, because if you notice, they're taking small bits and pieces. They remanded another case yesterday. There was a felon in possession case that got GVR'd yesterday from the Supreme Court. So they're doing this stuff in small bites.
Definitely something we're going to be watching closely, as I know Todd Vandermeide will, as well as somebody in the briefs here as the conclusion of litigants telling the judge what's up in this case. And obviously, Todd, people can stay updated with your thoughts at Freedoms of Steel on YouTube. Greatly appreciate you taking the time with us this morning.
No problem, guys. Take care, Greg.
All right, it is Illinois in Focus with another update there, and we'll be watching closely as to what happens in this case. But clearly, there's a lot of moving pieces, as Todd said. So be sure to stay tuned, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Join us each and every weekday morning for Illinois in Focus Daily. Get the podcasts anywhere you get podcasts. And also, don't forget, you've got the headlines at thecentersquare.com. thecentersquare.com. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. Former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan arriving to court, getting ready for the trial to really kick off in earnest after they picked all the jurors yesterday and started with opening statements. Welcome in. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Stay up to date with what's going on here in Illinois. So obviously, Speaker Madigan, longest serving state house speaker in history. He was in the legislature for 50 years. He then became speaker back in 1984 or 83. He was speaker for all but 2 years until 2021. It was revealed in 2020 that he was public official A in a federal what do they call it, a deferred prosecution agreement with ComEd, where they alleged that there was a 9-year bribery scheme that was meant to benefit the House Speaker and his allies with do-nothing jobs from ComEd. ComEd admitted to that in the deferred prosecution agreement, paid a fine, and we even had guilty verdicts for the ComEd 4, which was a collection of lobbyists and ComEd officials with close associations with Madigan. Now it's up for Madigan. He was charged with 23 counts with co-defendant Mike McLean in 2022. He then was brought to trial, and that started a couple of weeks ago with jury selection. But after the jury was selected, let's get into this. Here's what Madigan's team says. The powerful politician is incorruptible as his corruption trial starts. So let's read through some of this. Our reporter, Brett Rowland, investigative reporter up in the opening arguments yesterday, all day. Former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan was not an all-powerful state politician who corruptly controlled Springfield, but incorruptible. According to his defense team, Madigan's defense team, Thomas Breen, told jurors in his opening statements that Madigan viewed his job as helping people. He wasn't after power or money, as federal prosecutors have contended. Breen said Madigan, 82 years old, never used his position as Speaker of the House for personal gain. Prosecutors opened with a different description of Madigan. They described Madigan as the state's most powerful politician who was only interested in accumulating power, rewarding those loyal to him, and with no work contracts and other jobs that required little or no work. This is a case about corruption at the highest level of state government, the assistant U.S. attorney, Sarah Stryker, said during the prosecutor's opening statement. She said the multi-year racketeering and bribery scheme that prosecutors allege was more sophisticated than cash-in envelopes, but rather contracts disguised through third parties as lobbyists who rarely or never lobbied anyone. The prosecutor said Madigan used co-defendant Mike McLean to do his dirty work. When Madigan didn't want his fingerprints on something, he assigned McLean to handle it. They also went on to say it was McLean's job that he relished. So she also promised to present a case that jurors could see and hear, including 200 recordings for jurors over the course of the 11-week trial. And we're going to do what we can to get our hands on those recordings as they are presented to the court. So be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell for updates in this case. So clearly a lot going on here with this trial of the former Illinois House Speaker. You can read more of that story at thecentersquare.com. So be sure to get that and stay up to date. Governor J.B. Pritzker was asked about this yesterday at the start of the trial, and he shared his thoughts just about the issue of corruption. And does a trial like this taint the public's perception about other elected officials?
You know, I think on the one hand, of course, when there's any discussion of corruption by some elected officials, it hurts people on both sides of the aisle because, as you know, there's corruption that's occurred on, in both parties, and not just in Illinois, but you can say that in Illinois too. So that's certainly true. But the other side of it is people getting caught and tried, and in some cases, many cases, convicted, is a good thing because it says something to people who are thinking about maybe doing some corrupt act that maybe that's a bad idea because you're going to get caught. You're being watched. And I think that's hugely important. And, we've made adjustments to the ethics laws in the state of Illinois, but there are so many laws already on the books. That's why these people are getting caught and convicted. And so we want to make sure that people pay attention because we don't want corruption going forward.
So again, we've heard this line from Democrats before that, listen, I mean, the laws are already on the books. We can do some, what Republicans say is nibbling around the edges of ethics reforms. But the Democrats, when asked about this over the past few years, because it hasn't just been Madigan, there have been other Democrats that have been arrested and charged and convicted of corruption. You had Louis Arroyo taking a bribe from an undercover state senator who had some tax evasion charges and assisted feds in facilitating a bribe of another state lawmaker. You had the case of Martin Sandoval being ultimately, charged with corrupt acts. And I mean, the list goes on from there, even back to the Blagojevich saga. So regardless, Republicans have been very critical of Democrats who have the supermajority in Illinois of not acting on true ethics reforms. Illinois House Minority Leader Tony McCombie, the Republican from Savannah, she reacted to opening statements here yesterday when she was holding a separate news conference, and I asked her to give her thoughts about where we're at in the Madigan saga.
The Madigan trial is just a reminder of how things are in Illinois. And when you have people even on our social media or out and about, they're not even shocked by it because they're like, this is Illinois. Who's going to be the next person? So it is just really as a reminder. And it should be also, when we're talking about political and campaign finance reform and ethical behavior in campaigning, there's so many things that we could do and so many bills and pieces of legislation that the House Republicans have. We don't care. The Democrats can take those ideas and run with them. We have no problem with offering those solutions, but they don't even meet to discuss them. They don't even have conversation in one of their fake working groups. So this is a real issue, whether it's about ethics, whether it's about property taxes, the cost of inflation, our most recent issue with transit. They have a go it alone policy, and you have to have 60 Democrats before you can even bring a bill forward. I mean, the people of Illinois need to know what is happening that they're paying for. They need to know what is happening under our domes, and it comes down to power and ethics. And I got to be quite honest, I'm sick of the Illinois voters having their heads slammed on top of a counter over and over and over again in this state. And enough is enough.
It's, again, House Minority Leader Tony McCombie talking about the overall issue of the Madigan trial, corruption in Illinois government, and where we go from here. Another day of action in the federal courtroom. Be sure to get updated at thecentersquare.com. Pretty historic trial. Illinois' longest-serving State House Speaker facing corruption charges for self-dealing. All right, it's Illinois in Focus Daily. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us each and every weekday morning. And get the podcast where you get podcasts. Get the headlines at thecentersquare.com. And be sure to wake up every morning with us with America's Talking Network. The city of Chicago is changing their migrant shelter plan to bring in the homeless population and care for them, as they say that the number of non-citizen migrants coming to the city from the southern U.S. border has decreased. Welcome in. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell with America's Talking Network. Get the podcast where you get podcasts, and get the headlines at thecentersquare.com. So Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson announced a updated policy to where they are shifting their focus from intake of non-citizen migrants to helping all of Chicago's homeless, and some various changes and ins and outs there. But he held a news conference yesterday with other city officials talking about this and the direction that they plan on going next.
Due to the executive order signed by President Joe Biden and the hard work, we are now moving into a different phase of this humanitarian effort. Currently, we are seeing fewer and fewer asylum seekers arrive in the city of Chicago. And the resettlement efforts, wraparound services, and support provided in the shelter system by Chicago and our partners at the county and state empower thousands of new arrivals to be on a path to self-sufficiency. So we are now able to shift from a large-scale crisis response to a more cost-effective, equitable, and strategic approach that addresses homelessness for all who need support. We've already shown the world that we have the determination and the fight to meet the needs of almost 50,000 new arrivals in less than 2 years.
It's pretty wild to think about 50,000 new arrivals in the past 2 years, since August of 2022. And of course, these new arrivals coming from southern U.S. border communities being inundated. If you look at the numbers that are officially on the books, it's multiples of millions of people who've come across the border in the past 3.5 years. Former President Donald Trump saying that he believes the estimate's over 21 million. And he's obviously running for president. His opponent, Kamala Harris, is having to respond to questions about being the vice president in the Biden administration, while the Trump executive orders securing the border were reversed by Biden on day one when he took office in 2021. So interesting how political this issue really is when you get down to it. And with the city's plan here, obviously they're expanding their operations to include homeless people. But, a lot of money and a lot of resources are going into this. Illinoisans already paying more than $1 billion in housing, food, school, lawyers, and healthcare subsidies from taxpayers on non-citizen migrants. So the cost high, and a lot of people feel like they're being, left out of their own tax dollars by them going to non-citizen migrants. But the issue heated up in the questions and answers with Johnson blaming former President Donald Trump for the migrant crisis.
Should they be concerned about work authorization? Yes. Does the mayor of Chicago have the ability to authorize work? No. So that's why I'm fighting our federal government, and particularly the Republican Party that's being led by a freaking lunatic who told them not to support substantive, comprehensive immigration reform because he wants to prove a political point. And he has worked to pit poor brown people against poor black people. Shame on him. You talk about a joker. It's Donald Trump.
So over the weekend, Trump, of course, outside of delivering French fries after frying them up at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania, he held a town hall where he took a bunch of questions from members of the audience. The issue of immigration was among the most questions asked, and he talked about the need and his plans to go after nonviolent criminal aliens, or rather to go after the violent criminal aliens. The ones who have a record of murder, for instance. But he also responded to that line there from Johnson, saying that Trump blocked the migration law that the Biden administration said they wanted 3 years ago. So here's former President Trump responding to that line of criticism.
I watched her the other night about a bill. The bill was a disaster, by the way. It was a horrible bill. Would have let people have immunity. It would have given people, millions of people would have allowed it to come in aimlessly. We start with the murderers. We know who they are. We don't know everything about them because they've been let in without being vetted. But we start with the murderers. Nobody wants to have murders. These are people that some were getting the death penalty. They were going to be executed in their own. Some killed more than 5 people. Some killed more than 2 people. One killed like 9 or 10 people. We want them out. We start with them. We start with the drug dealers. We start with the people that are causing. Oh, by the way, you start also with the terrorists. You got to get them out.
So the former president laying out how he plans to deport violent non-citizen aliens in the United States, starting with them, going then after the criminals and winding down. He said, obviously, it's going to be tough because there's going to be a lot of news about one person whose husband was carted off by federal officials. But he said that they have to persist to get the violent non-citizen migrants out of the country. Interesting also in his conversation about this, he talked about how he's going to rely on local law enforcement. the sheriffs, the local police. He says they know these individuals, they know who they are, and they will better assist federal immigration authorities to go after these individuals. But what about in a state like Illinois? You've got the sanctuary status of laws in place that prohibit local and state police from assisting federal immigration authorities for detainer orders. If that's the only thing that they have to go and apprehend somebody and detain them. So clearly, Illinois' sanctuary state policies, and even the city of Chicago's sanctuary policies, and anywhere else non-citizen migrants may be living in the state of Illinois, it raises substantial questions as to how effective a Trump policy of that deporting violent non-citizen migrants, how's that going to play out in Illinois? State Representative Paul Jacobs, a Republican, he laid out his thoughts about the sanctuary state policies and how they need to go.
One, my district has 4 of the poorest, actually the 3 poorest counties of the 102. The fourth county is about 15th poorest, but I have the number 3, the number 2, and the number 1 poorest counties. We're spending $1 billion, and we added $1 billion in taxes to offset the $1 billion we are spending on illegal immigration. If I could have just a few million of that in my district, I would be tickled pink. It's wrong, and it's wrong for people to say we have to take care of the poor, we have to take care of the folks that are coming over the border. We have to take care of our own people first. And I'm very sorry. I want to take care of the whole world, but I want to see the poor. I've got such poor areas in this district. And then you go to Chicago, we've got areas in Chicago. We're not taking care of any of the poor kids up there either. So don't do a sanctuary state. We need to repeal the sanctuary state and go back to taking care of our own. I don't even quite understand how we could even think that we could afford that. But it's some idea that the Democrats have is let's just raise taxes. I can't have taxes raised. I've practiced optometry for 45 years, living very comfortably in Southern Illinois. But I decided, no, I need to run for this office also. And I have seen the problems with the state. One of the biggest ones is the sanctuary state status. I'm sorry, but we need to take care of our own.
Again, that's State Representative Paul Jacobs sharing his thoughts about the state's sanctuary policies. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Wake up with us with America's Talking Network each weekday morning at about 8 o'clock Central Time if you want to stay plugged in with what's going on here in Illinois. And to get the podcast wherever you get podcasts, and also the headlines at thecentersquare.com. And we'll see you soon. All right, that's all I got for you today. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. We'll be back at it tomorrow with a whole bunch more analysis of the day's news and where we go from here. Election Day is 2 weeks away. That's wild. So I know a lot of people are looking forward to it just being done with. So we'll have to do a lot of review of the various things that people are being asked on the statewide ballots in various counties throughout the state. We'll have to review state house races, but also seats in Congress and the office of the presidency. So a lot more to tackle. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day. We'll see you back here soon. The Illinois in Focus Daily.